Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Brock Klinger, and I am the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Harbor Compliance. The presentation should now be up on your screen, should be able to see that now. If you're having any trouble seeing the presentation, click that link in the email that you received, and we'll be sending a link to the webinar, the recording of the presentation after we conclude today. So if you can't see it right now, not to worry, we will get you a copy of it one way or another. Please feel free to share that copy with the others within your organization. So a little bit of background about Harbor Compliance before we get started here. Harbor Compliance is the multi-state compliance provider of choice for over 40,000 clients. We're a nationwide provider of registered agent, business registration, and licensing services and software. We also extensively support nonprofit organizations, primarily through Labyrinth, our nonprofit brand. And today we are going to talk about one of the buzziest, most scintillating topics in business compliance: beneficial ownership information, or BOI, reporting requirements under the Corporate Transparency Act. This is our agenda. Today we'll cover beneficial ownership information reporting requirements, why maintaining BOI should be a priority for all businesses, what it takes to file a BOI report, and how to manage and simplify the BOI reporting process. This presentation will be roughly 45 minutes in length, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So feel free, log those questions as we go. I'd like to start this presentation off with a poll question, just to get a feel for how familiar you all are with the requirements. And the poll is launched. So, how familiar are you with BOI reporting requirements? Totally unfamiliar? Maybe never heard of it? Maybe unsure if they apply to you? Or maybe you're rock solid on this topic. You know exactly what the score is and how it's going to apply to your organization. No shame in any of this. The idea is that by the end of the presentation, we'll all leave with a solid foundation of knowledge for how to manage the requirements. Okay, thank you for the responses. Looks like most folks have heard of them. Um, Not quite sure if they apply, but not to worry. We're going to go through that today. Thanks a lot. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and apologize right up front. A lot of acronyms in today's presentation. You got to love the federal government and their acronyms. You're going to hear a lot of those today. I'm going to try and define each and every one of these as we go to try and make this as easy as possible to follow. So first, before we dive in, I want to give you a little bit of the background, give you the explanation why behind BOI reporting. So the whole reason that BOI reporting exists in the first place is to accomplish the objectives of a law that was passed by Congress back in 2021. So it's been around a while. Law was known as the Corporate Transparency Act, abbreviated CTA. The CTA was passed as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, and its primary objective is to prevent money laundering, terrorism financing, and other illicit financial activities by promoting transparency within corporate structures. So, how does BOI, or beneficial ownership information reporting, support the CTA's objectives? It does so by requiring most organizations to report information about the individuals who control their operations to the federal government. These individuals are known as beneficial owners, hence the term beneficial ownership information reporting. Now, by revealing the individuals who benefit from a business, it becomes more challenging for criminals to operate that business anonymously. You're familiar with the saying, follow the money? BOI reporting allows the federal government to more easily follow the money and identify bad actors behind complex corporate structures. The agency responsible for collecting BOI is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. FinCEN is a division of the U.S. Department of Treasury, and it has issued much of the education about this requirement. It's developed the filing process and launched the online filing portal, and it oversees enforcement. Up on the screen is a quote from the agency, which describes how they view BOI supporting its purpose. says BOI can provide essential information to law enforcement, intelligence, and national security professionals as they work to protect the United States from bad actors who exploit anonymous shell companies to engage in money laundering, corruption, sanctions and tax evasion, drug trafficking, fraud, and a host of other criminal offenses with impunity, while legitimate businesses suffer from their misdeeds. So that's the why. That's why this requirement exists. Now, while the CTA is a federal act and the FinCEN agency itself is a federal agency, multiple states are actively considering or have already passed similar requirements. For example, DC introduced a similar reporting requirement way back in 2020, and both New York and South Dakota passed their own laws this year. California and Massachusetts are also considering bills that would require additional state-level BOI report submissions for entities within their own borders. Now, today's presentation is going to focus strictly on the federal requirement, but you need to be aware that the state-level requirements are on the rise. I hear a lot of kind of back and forth hemming and hawing about whether or not this requirement is going to be around. As we'll get to later on in the presentation, whether you think it will be around long term or not, now is not really the time to debate that. It's more the time to get filing right away. But the fact that so many states are copying this type of legislation should serve as a good indication that at least the states who are insiders on a lot of these requirements seem to think these requirements will be around for a long time to come. So let's now take a deeper look at what a beneficial owner actually is. And there are a lot of words up there on that slide, but I'll take you through this slowly. I think it's simpler to understand than you might imagine. So again, for starters, it's a natural person. It's a human being, okay? Beneficial owners cannot be business entities. In addition to being human, they either exercise substantial control over a reporting company, or they own or control at least 25% of its ownership interests, or both. The ownership test is the easier of these two tests to understand. This one's pretty simple. If you own at least 25% of a reporting company, either directly or indirectly, congratulations, you are officially a beneficial owner. Substantial control, on the other hand, that one's a little more nuanced, okay? And that's really what the explanatory text is all about. So let's break that one down. Substantial control is said to exist if the individual in question is a senior officer of the reporting company. So this could be all senior officers, including, but not limited to, the president, the CEO, the general counsel, chief operating officer, chief financial officer, et cetera. But it's not the title that matters, okay? Even if the title of this individual is janitor, they may be beneficial owners if they perform functions normally reserved for senior officers. The other criteria could be that they have the ability to appoint or remove senior officers, board directors, or similar bodies. They may control important decisions about the business's direction, its finances, or its legal structure. Or it has any other form of substantial control over the reporting company. And that last one's really just the catch-all. That's to make sure that unique or creative control structures can't circumvent the reporting requirements. Now, the other thing you need to be aware of is that entities formed on or after January 1st, 2024, that is this year, they may also need to report information about the individual or individuals who directly files the documents that created or registered the company. And if there's more than one person involved in that whole filing process, the individual that is, who is primarily responsible for directing or controlling the filing must also be included in the report. These people are referred to as company applicants, okay, because they applied to form the company. Those individuals only need to be included for entities that were formed this year and going forward. And the same ongoing reporting requirements that apply to beneficial owners don't necessarily apply to the company applicants, but recognize there are sections on the filing form itself, the online form, that will request that data if your entity was formed this year or any time in the future. Quick aside on this requirement. We have spoken with many business owners about BOI reporting and the Corporate Transparency Act in general, and there are really two big things that stand out in their responses. The first one is just how little awareness there is around this topic. And despite the fact that the reporting window has been open since January 1st of this year, most business owners have not been keeping up with the requirements. And this point was reiterated just 2 weeks ago by FinCEN when our team met with Phil Lamb. He's the beneficial ownership and innovation chief at FinCEN, heads up the whole program. He confirmed that about 28 million reports remain to be filed this year. 28 million out of the potential 32 to 34 estimates range. That comes out to over 250,000 reports per day that need to be submitted through the end of the year to be on pace for their filing goal. There's obviously a major gap of awareness here, and there's obvious concern about that lack of awareness, given how many reports remain to be filed. In fact, Phil, he stated there's no way to know for sure how the FinCEN system will even hold up under the strain of those millions of files, those filings that are being submitted before the end of the year. They all but came out and said the system would likely be down toward the end of the year. He reiterated, though, the agency is going to hold firm on its deadline. It's not changing that January 1 filing deadline. So that's point number one we've been hearing. A lot of people are unaware of the requirement. The second thing that we frequently hear might help to explain the first, and it's that business owners are expecting their accountants or attorneys to at least notify them of it and potentially even handle it. And this is really where business owners should sit up and listen, because in general, most attorneys and accountants do not plan to offer BOI reporting services for one of a few different reasons. First, you need to understand that completing a BOI report involves collecting and storing a lot of very sensitive, personally identifiable information, or PII. And the second thing, the ongoing need to update FinCEN with any business changes, that presents a lot of complexity for any vendor who may want to take care of this for you. And you put those two things together, and it presents a major technological challenge and a data security risk that a lot of law and accounting firms just don't want to deal with. And it's not always just a matter of preference for the law firms and accounting firms. Lots of these firms have internal compliance protocols that prevent them from providing this service directly to their clients. It's just against their internal policies. Now, of course, we know accountants and attorneys want to meet this need for their clients. We know because we have dozens, hundreds, frankly, of relationships with law and accounting firms across multiple industries. So many of these firms are exploring partnering with third-party providers like Harbor Compliance to handle the filings for their clients. By doing that approach, it really allows them to sit in this position of being able to educate their clients the way that their clients are really expecting them to in the first place, while at the same time offering a solution that decisively meets that need without having to build all the technology and handle the PII, which could put their firms at risk. So accountants and attorneys, no doubt, will play a large role in helping their clients meet BOI reporting requirements. They'll likely be the first line of communication to notify them of the requirement itself. For the most part, however, they probably won't be very involved in submitting BOI reports for their clients. Instead, they'll be referring those clients to partners to manage the filing requirements, or in many cases, working with those partners to build a BOI reporting technology solution into their back office process that provides a seamless brand experience for their clients. And that's really what we're executing with a lot of the partners that we work with as well. Now, among the minority of business owners who are actually aware of BOI reporting requirements, the big questions on their mind is, do these requirements apply to my business? And we've seen a lot of hesitation from business owners unsure whether or not the requirements will impact their business. Let me put it to you really simply. 97% of all organizations registered in the US will likely have to report. These numbers are really overwhelming. So the quibbling of, does it apply to me? Does it make sense for me to report? Chances are it's going to impact you, and it's time to start taking action. So let's get into why that is important. Now, granted, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the exemptions that exist, right? And this may be a source of some of the hesitation. There are 23 different exemption categories out there. However, these tend to be very narrow, and they apply only to highly regulated organizations like banks, insurance providers, utilities, nonprofits with 501c3 or 527 tax exemptions. By the way, though, nonprofits that aren't federally tax exempt generally must report. They are impacted by the filing requirements. The thought process here is that these organizations are already disclosing so much information to the government about their activities through license filings and other reports that BOI reporting really wouldn't tell the federal government that much more information about them that they didn't already have. But if you're wondering if your organization is going to qualify for any of these exemptions, we'll talk about this later in the presentation, but there are lots of resources that we have available to you. There are many niche exemptions, granted, but there's only one broad one, and that's the large operating company exemption. The large operating company exemption includes entities with at least 20 full-time employees, a U.S. operating presence, and a tax return reporting over $5 million in gross receipts or sales from last year. If you meet all three of those criteria, then you may be exempt from having to report BOI. Now, I'm going to throw up another poll here really quickly, and we'll take a look and see how many of you might fall into that exempt category. Okay, launching now. Should be up on your screen. This is a three-part question. Let's find out if that broad exemption category applies to you. Does your organization have 20 or fewer full-time employees? Did your organization report gross receipts or sales of $5 million or less on its federal tax return last year? Does your organization regularly conduct business at a physical location in the U.S.? Depending on your responses to these questions, we ought to be able to see fairly definitively whether or not you'll fall into that large operating company exemption. You've got to check the box on all three simultaneously to be exempt. Okay. Still a few responses trickling in. I'll give you a second. This is good. This is a good exercise to go through to find out whether or not you're going to have to report this information. We'll certainly follow up and clarify the responses here. Okay. Thank you all. We'll end the poll there. Okay. Assuming that an entity doesn't fall into the 3% of companies that are expected to be exempt from reporting BOI, owners need to know when their initial report is due. If the business is one of the roughly 32 million reporting companies FinCEN estimated to be in existence as of the end of 2023, those owners are in luck. You might have just a few more days to report before the 90-day timeline kicks in. Still have just a little bit of time to report before everybody is in that 90-day category. But as we'll discuss later in the presentation, it's probably going to be in your best interest to move that along sooner rather than later. On the other hand, if you're formed or registered to do business in the U.S. during the current calendar year, reporting deadlines may have already passed. FinCEN expects to receive an initial BOI report within just 90 days of formation or registration. So that means entities that were formed less than 3 months, more than 3 months in the past, their deadlines may have already passed for that initial report. Now, we know from FinCEN that they have not been enforcing the penalties for these initial reports. So if you haven't submitted it yet and you haven't been contacted by anyone to indicate that you want to submit it, you want to act right now because there's no guarantee that that grace period is going to be extended. While they have not yet started to assess penalties, there's really nothing standing in their way. They could choose at any point to start assessing penalties against organizations that haven't filed their initial BOI report within the 90-day period from formation this year. The expectations for next year for future entities are even stricter. After 2024, newly formed or registered entities will have to submit the BOI report in just 30 days. It's important to understand that the BOI reporting requirement itself isn't just a one-time thing. You have to remember that BOI reporting allows the federal government to more easily follow the money, right? And they're identifying the bad actors behind complex corporate structures. That's only possible. It's only going to work if the information that FinCEN has on file is up to date, right? That makes sense. And that means that any BOI reported to FinCEN must be updated as soon as it changes. Otherwise, that information that's on file could quickly become outdated, not very useful for law enforcement. So accordingly, FinCEN offers report types to collect not only initial information submissions, but updates and corrections as well. You file an updated report to notify FinCEN of changes in reported beneficial ownership information. So for example, if you make changes to an organization's name, you register a new DBA, you update its address, you change its ownership, all of those things could trigger an updated BOI report. And those reports must be filed within 30 days of the underlying change event occurring. Updated reports are also used to notify FinCEN when an entity's exemption eligibility has changed. So, for example, think about a nonprofit formed this year that's in the process of applying for federal tax exemption. The tax exemption process with the IRS may take longer than 90 days, right? So that means the nonprofit will need to report BOI to FinCEN in the meantime, and they'll need to maintain that information and keep it up to date until the federal tax exemption is granted. And once the exemption is granted, then they can turn around, file an updated report, notify FinCEN, and they're off the hook. They won't have to report BOI anymore. Finally, corrected reports. FinCEN understands that some honest mistakes in reporting will be inevitable. The agency offers corrected reports to fix inaccuracies in previously submitted BOI. Entities have 30 days, once again, to submit a corrected BOI report from the date the owner became aware of the inaccuracy. So, I guess it's technically possible for a business to only have to report BOI one time in its entire life cycle. That's assuming that none of the underlying information ever changes. And I took a look at the recently released materials from the FinCEN toolkit on their website, came out a week or two ago, and a lot of their messaging is about, oh, well, it should really only be a one-time filing process. And that's good, right? They want to encourage people to start filing right away and don't hesitate. But having dealt with over 40,000 clients and monitored and seen how information for an entity can change over the years, I think it's highly unlikely that an organization won't ever have to report some sort of change. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We will cover this later on in the presentation, but this whole concept of paralysis by analysis is really problematic right now, especially how close we are to the filing deadline, right? We are just about to be inside the 90-day mark to submit your initial report, and there are millions of filings to be submitted. I'm seeing a lot of paralysis by analysis, wondering whether or not we're going to be exempt, or what if I submit this filing unnecessarily? Well, I'm here to relieve your concerns. There are no penalties for filing a report if it's not required. All that needs to be done is another filing submitted to indicate, hey, I'm exempt, I don't need a report. And the service that Harbor Compliance offers provides up to 4 filings per year. So if you're unsure if a filing needs to be submitted, you could do that initial filing and then turn around and have it corrected so you don't have to report anymore for the list price, no additional fee, and there's no charge from FinCEN for the submission either. So don't let those sorts of questions delay your initial filing. So with that being said, I have yet another poll. All right, should be up on your screen. Have you reported BOI yet? Why or why not? No judgments here, don't worry. No wrong answers. It's totally fine. You are in good company. As I've already mentioned, FinCEN just told us the other week, 28 million others out there just like you haven't reported yet. I'm more curious as to why. What's holding you up? The whole purpose of this webinar is to help you understand the requirements and navigate this more easily. So the better I can understand what kind of confusion or challenges you're up against, the better I can help you navigate this process. Okay. Interesting. I've got nearly 50 people saying that my organization's filing deadline isn't until the end of the year, and that's the primary reason they haven't filed yet. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. I'm glad that that is a feature and one of the reasons that people are giving for not acting right now. But You're going to learn some information in this presentation. In fact, I'll skip ahead and get to the cut to the chase right now. FinCEN reported to us 2 weeks ago that many companies have taken 2 to 4 months, 2 to 4 months to gather the information necessary to file. The time to act is right now, because if it takes 4 months, there goes the deadline. The other thing that I mentioned earlier, I alluded to, would be the challenges they may experience with their portal supporting the millions of filings towards the end of the year. I don't want to count them out before we've had any issues, but if FinCEN's portal is down for the month of December because the volume is too large, that could make submitting filings towards the end of the year really difficult for folks. So now is the time to act. Thank you very much for those responses. On to the next slide. Okay, next, let's discuss why reporting should be a priority for every business. This should be pretty apparent, I think, to everyone. First, reporting under the Corporate Transparency Act is the law. Kind of important to follow the law. And there's a public benefit component to that. Up until now, U.S. has actually lagged behind the rest of the world in terms of corporate transparency requirements, and the CTA really catches us up with a lot of other countries. Just as a business files its tax return and maintains its licenses, BOI reporting is just another best practice in demonstrating good corporate citizenship. And if good corporate citizenship alone isn't enough to convince you, and really, who is that not enough a reason to convince you to do this? You need to be aware the government has also introduced some serious sticks in the form of fines and penalties that go along with the carrot of good corporate citizenship. So we'll talk a little bit about what those penalties are, what they look like. They're not pretty. As we've discussed, this has been law since 2021. And despite that fact, many business owners are still unaware of the requirements and how it impacts them. BOI reporting is not optional, and not submitting an accurate report timely can expose businesses to significant penalties. Technically, no one needed to report BOI to FinCEN in the first 89 days of the year, but we are way past that point. That is well in the past at this point. FinCEN will begin and reserves the right to penalize companies for failure to file BOI reports. And that alone has moved BOI reporting to the top of a lot of company priority lists. There are two types of reporting violations. The first is willful provision or attempt to provide false information in a BOI report. The second is willful failure to provide a complete updated BOI report. In either case, businesses may face civil or criminal penalties. As far as civil penalties are concerned, those violations, they can result in fines of up to $591 per day, capped at $11,280 per violation. Those are adjusted up back in January to account for inflation. And with respect to the criminal penalties, up to 2 years of imprisonment may result. It's not an either-or scenario. Both of those things can happen simultaneously. But don't worry, you don't have to experience these. You can submit proactively and avoid those types of penalties. There are really two approaches to maintain compliance when you report BOI. The common sense practical approach, the one that I've been advocating for through the presentation here, and also the most comprehensive way to achieve compliance, is just immediately report BOI for all entities that could reasonably be impacted by the requirements. You take that approach, and you as a business owner avoid that paralysis by analysis and put the requirement behind you as fast as possible. This is especially important for those entities that were formed this year, obviously on the tighter timeline. If you take that approach, you avoid having to complete the report towards the end of the year when you know they're going to be busiest. FinCEN is going to receive millions of reports over the coming months. And as they've indicated themselves, this could be a problem for their online filing system. It may not support that volume. If it doesn't, and worse comes to worse, and the system can't keep up, preventing businesses from filing, there is no guarantee the deadline is going to be extended. They were very firm that January 1st is their deadline, and they're not moving their deadline. So on one hand, by simply reporting now and keeping that information up to date, the likelihood of being penalized is virtually eliminated. And as I've mentioned, there are no filing violations for entities that report, even if they don't have to. If in the future you find out you're exempt, you don't have to report BOI, submit that updated report. You submit that anytime, and it'll eliminate the need to report the information going forward. All of that will be covered under the standard hardware compliance service. Now, on the other hand, business owners do have the option to closely scrutinize the exemption criteria. You can define the beneficial owners for each and every one of the entities that you can control. And, that may include enlisting the help of an attorney to make a legal determination on whether or not they need to report. This approach ensures BOI is reported for only the entities that are absolutely required to provide it. But not every business is going to want to spend the money to have an attorney review their exemption, their ownership structure, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention that legal review, that can take some time. You can reach out to your attorney and you can spend a couple of weeks reviewing the statutes that have to do with this. So this approach might not be ideal for those owners who just want to put their requirement behind them quickly. Those folks that formed an entity this year and are on the 90-day filing timeline, they may not have the time to wait, may not be able to afford to wait for a full legal determination. Ultimately, businesses need to weigh the cost of reporting BOI right now with the cost of scrutinizing how those requirements impact their businesses and the potential risks of delaying the report. Being proactive is the answer here, in our opinion. That will eliminate the risk of missed deadlines and penalties. All that being said, we have a takeaway. I have a takeaway. I have a homework assignment for everyone. You need to take this back to your team. Bear in mind that maintaining legal compliance is not only the law, it's a best practice for businesses of all kinds. BOI reporting is now a reality of operating a compliant business. It is not going away. So your job immediately after this presentation is spread the word among your leadership and broader organization. So as we've covered well over and over at this point, many business owners don't know about this, but there's no longer any excuse for not knowing about it. You've heard about it. You can educate the team at your own organization about this requirement. And for all the attorneys, all you CPAs on the call today, you may not need or want to be experts on the CTA. That I can completely understand and appreciate. However, your clients do need to know about this requirement, and they are expecting you to tell them about it. So don't risk damaging the reputation that you've created, the relationship, the trust that you've established over the years. Let them know. Inform them proactively. They will thank you for it. We certainly hope that this presentation gives you high-level information on where to direct clients. Hint, hint, wink, wink, who could help you out with this. If you're like many of the other firms we work with, we'd be happy to collaborate with you on educating your firms and clients in a similar format to this one. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm the head of sales and marketing here at Harbor Compliance. I have developed marketing in a box for all the partners that we work with to educate their own clients about these requirements. I'd be happy to share those assets with you. I worked hard on them. I think you'd appreciate them, and I know your clients would. So, regardless of your role or your firm's position on offering a CTA solution, take that initiative and start the conversation. Okay, so with that, I have another poll question. How are you all managing the process? Where are you at in the process of reporting? Okay, thank you very much for those responses. Looks like haven't started gathering beneficial ownership information yet is the most common response. Not surprising. It's okay. No judgment here. You're not going to get any shade from us. We're going to help you through this process. So that's no problem. If you're starting from scratch, we'd be happy to step in and lend support. Thank you very much for those responses. Okay. So let's move on and discuss what it takes to report BOI. There are really 4 phases to reporting the beneficial ownership information: research, file, monitor, and maintain. And there are 2 parts to the research phase. First, determine whether or not you'll have to report BOI. And second, gather the information needed to complete the report. So even though 97% of businesses will need to report, there is still a lot of hesitation about reporting BOI. So again, the most common question we get is, does this apply to my organization? So again, I alluded to this earlier, but I want to reiterate the point. I want to call out the fact that we've intentionally designed our service to eliminate this paralysis by analysis. It's not necessary. Recognizing that this is a big hangup for a lot of businesses, we've included up to 4 filings per year in our service, including the initial, updated, and corrected reports. And that means we can take care of your initial report now and declare your exemption later for no additional charge. FinCEN assesses no penalties for submitting unnecessary reports, and there is no fee for the additional report. So this is what is curing paralysis by analysis for our clients. Being said, if you want to be absolutely sure you're only submitting reports that are absolutely necessary, we have multiple helpful resources to assist you. The first one is to scan the top QR code to take our free exemption quiz. It'll take you just a few minutes to complete. The results will be sent to your inbox. Take just a few minutes, they'll email right over to you. You can scan that top QR code now to be directed to the exemption quiz. Now, I do want to be clear, however, that the quiz offers only general guidance, and it's not meant to replace legal advice from an attorney. That's not what it's for. It's legal information rather than legal guidance. If you are one of these entities with a truly complex ownership structure or deep questions about who your beneficial owners are, and you'd instead prefer to hear from an attorney because you feel you can't move forward without it, we can help coordinate that as well. It's not a problem. Scan the bottom QR code to be directed to a web form where you can request contact from a professional attorney, licensed and experienced in BOI. Okay, they can walk you through the details of the Corporate Transparency Act. It'll be a separate engagement. It won't be with Harbor Compliance. It'll be with a real law firm, a partner of ours who can guide you through this. There will be an additional fee for it as well, but you can get the answers that you need. Once you've confirmed your organization will need to report, it's time then to gather the information required to file. Every organization must report 2 types of information: company and individual. Okay. Required company information is pretty basic. It includes things like company name, address, the formation jurisdiction or where it was registered. The information required of individuals is straightforward too: name, date of birth, residential address. Note, as I mentioned before, though, there are 2 different categories of individuals that can be listed on a BOI report. That'd be the beneficial owners and the company applicants. So quick refresher here. The beneficial owners, those are the individuals with ownership or substantial control over the entity. Every report must include at least one, but there can be many of them. In fact, there's technically no limit to how many beneficial owners a single reporting company can have. On the other hand, company applicants, those are the individuals who either created or caused the reporting company to be created. It's generally the person who files the formation paperwork with the Secretary of State and the person who directed them to do that. Company applicants must only be listed on reports by reporting companies that were formed in 2024, that is this year, or later. Each report can include up to 2 company applicants, but at least 1 is required for those entities formed in 2024 or later. Really quick note on FinCEN IDs, just for the sake of being complete. FinCEN can issue IDs to both individuals and companies. The ID number can then be entered into the BOI report, eliminating the need to type in their specific details for each filing. And this approach can save time, especially for clients with multiple entities and beneficial owners. And we, of course, leverage it wherever possible because it saves everyone and a lot of time and makes it more efficient. Now, first, gathering this information, because it is straightforward details about folks and your businesses, it seems pretty simple, but there's more to it than meets the eye. Before you reach out and start collecting information from all your beneficial owners and company applicants, you need to consider 2 things. The first is the security of the data you're collecting, and the second, the time you'll need to invest in collecting it. Okay. First up, data security. Residential addresses, images of government IDs, and other personal details required to report BOI, those constitute personally identifiable information, PII, that I alluded to earlier in the presentation. You need to have certain security protocols in place to transfer that and store it, okay? Simply emailing or texting that stuff back and forth internally, that's a no-no. That's not secure. It's a real risk to your business. And believe me, you don't want to invest in creating a secure private environment to collect and store this information on your own when you could save yourself a lot of time, effort, and money by working with Harbor Compliance. Our information collection process includes all the necessary protections to allow you to confidently request, store, and maintain sensitive PII. Now let's talk about time investment. FinCEN estimates completing a single BOI report will take about 3 hours. Now, based on the recent presentation from Phil Lamb, it's clear that was a little overgenerous. They mentioned that many businesses took, again, 2 to 4 months to collect the required information. The time to start this process is right now. If you're dealing with multiple entities, this message is even more urgent. And that's what we're trying to illustrate here with the hierarchy. If there are multiple entities, every one of them could take up to 3 hours or more to complete the report. So I want you to perform a thought experiment with me. Imagine being a trusted admin at a multi-entity organization reporting BOI, okay? CEO comes to you and says, go get everything everybody needs to report BOI for all the entities under our company umbrella. You'll need to navigate the ownership and management structure of each entity to find the right individuals. You'll have to get their contact information. You have to call them all up on the phone. Don't contact them by email and don't text them to protect the PII that you're going to collect from them. And then field all of the wonderful follow-up questions about why is this necessary and what do you want to use this information for? And that process is all before you even filed anything, okay? The point here is that I'm driving at Harbor Compliance. The system just saves you a ton of time by allowing you or your admin to send dedicated information collection forms to each of your individuals. This approach keeps your data safe. It avoids sharing PII via email where it could be intercepted by bad actors. You simply enter the person's email address and our system goes to work collecting the data. And since it's our system that collects the data, you don't have to worry about contacting anyone to explain what a BOI report is. What does FinCEN stand for? What is the meaning of collecting all this information? The system's interface and the notifications that are built into it handle all of that. Not to mention, the information forms are just easy. It provides a user-friendly experience with helpful explanations and an intuitive design. So anyone, anywhere, with no training necessary, can receive these information request forms, fill them out in the first try without issue or hesitation. So once you've run the gauntlet of collecting all the required information securely, it's time to access the FinCEN Beneficial Ownership Secure System, or BOSS portal, and file. Now, in our experience, the BOSS portal itself, it's fairly usable, but like any piece of technology, it has imperfections. And the big thing here that we've seen already is that it tends to time out if a report isn't completed quickly enough. So put yourself back in that admin shoes, right? Now imagine getting 3/4 of the way through the 58-question form before being asked to take care of some other task that your CEO needs you to handle. When you revisit the form, you realize the system timed out and you have to start over from square one. This is not fun. This is not a good position to be in as a trusted admin. In their recent presentation, FinCEN expressed concerns about the portal's ability to handle the millions of reports that will need to be submitted before the end of the year. All the more reason to get started immediately and get your filings out of the way before that year-end rush. One of the many benefits of working with Harbor Compliance is that we insulate you from having to work with FinCEN directly. We take care of that for you. It avoids you and your staff dealing with these kinds of inconveniences. Quick side note on FinCEN's API. Some of you may have heard about this. FinCEN offers a publicly available API. It allows users to access BOI reporting information directly in their system, sidestepping the manual data entry required by the BOSS portal. Saves time. And it's great, right? It's great in theory if you have the technical know-how and the time to connect to it. It can be very helpful. In theory, it should make submitting filings in large volume much faster. Reality is, though, few firms want to invest the time and effort required to connect to that FinCEN API. Harbor Compliance is an approved FinCEN BOI filing partner, able to take advantage of these advanced reporting capabilities, so you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. And when you're working with Harbor Compliance, you can rest assured you're working with the most advanced approaches to information collection and transmission out there. And while we're completing the reports on your behalf, you'll maintain complete visibility into our progress via the easy-to-use project status screen, which allows you to communicate with our team of experts responsible for submitting your filings. But really, the most important benefit is how your data is organized. We centrally store everything you share with us so it can be readily accessed across multiple reports. Regardless of how many BOI reports your organization needs to submit, each and every data point is requested only one time. If you're a direct client, you provide the details of your reporting companies one time via our secure web-based information form. Each of your beneficial owners and company applicants, they each receive their own customized form in their own email inboxes, which they also fill out just one time. And for partners, it's even easier. You securely send us a bulk file, all your client entities in one place and their beneficial owners and company applicants. We import that into the system and then send the individuals their information collection forms. Your reports are then prepared on your behalf, eliminating the need for you or your clients to key in the details multiple times across entities. Okay, so now that brings us to monitor. We're on step number 3, monitoring. I can't stress enough the recurring nature of BOI reporting. It's not a once and done filing. FinCEN expects to have up-to-date BOI on file at all times. In practice, you'll need to take a snapshot of whatever data you report to FinCEN, share it with all of your beneficial owners, and take time to routinely review the information to make sure you catch changes as early as possible. You'll be building a new business process to monitor aspects of your beneficial owners' lives that you may never have been privy to before. You're going to find out things that you never thought you'd need to know about the people who own your companies. You'll need to start proactively asking beneficial owners if and when they plan to move residences. Are you buying a new house anytime soon? Are you going to move residences? Because that's going to trigger an updated report. Are you getting married soon? Because if your legal name changes, I'm going to have to file an updated report. Those sorts of things you'll need to monitor proactively. And the monitoring, it doesn't stop with just changes in the individual's lives or the information. You'll need to stay in close touch with anyone able to make changes to company level details as well. So if your business is moving offices, that's an updated report. Planning to register a new name, do a rebrand, could be an updated report. Planning to sell an ownership stake, you're going to raise some external funds by selling some shares, could be another updated report. Pay attention to these sorts of changes. Monitoring also extends to the requirement itself. Excuse me. So maybe you've heard about the challenge, the CTA in Alabama. It was a lawsuit brought by the National Small Business Association. And you might have even heard just this week, I think it was just this week, about the recent ruling by a federal court in Oregon, which upheld the constitutionality of the act. Both of those cases are going to be appealed. They're both appealed. And in the recent presentation, FinCEN came out and shared that the cases, regardless of what the result of them are, if they get escalated to the Supreme Court, they certainly won't be resolved before the deadline. The deadline is here, and it's not going away before the end of the year. Certainly, there are going to be future legal challenges like these that may impact reporting requirements for some businesses. You'll also need to stay on top of any new requirements or guidance released by FinCEN, as well as any new copycat legislation, like we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that happens at the state level. But when you work with Harbor Compliance, you'll be able to see all of the most recent information in your client portal, and you can easily and securely collaborate with all your individuals. And not only that, you'll receive automated reminders to check in with those key stakeholders and benefit from our close monitoring of FinCEN and state level requirements. And finally, you actually have to act on changes to all of that data that you're monitoring by submitting updated and corrected reports. And both of those, I should mention, they need to be submitted within 30 days of learning of the underlying change events. If you fail to do that, the very same penalties that apply to you, the $591 a day penalty, it's capped at over $11,000, that apply when you don't file on time your initial report, those same penalties apply when you don't submit your updated, corrected reports on time. And this is where Harbor Compliance really shines. Not only does our BOI reporting service include up to 4 initial, updated, and corrected reports per year, but the data we store for your reports is processed by our compliance score algorithm. The result is actionable insight into what you need to maintain not only your BOI reporting obligations, but the good standing of your legal entities, your business licenses, and tax registrations. With the power of Compliance Core, we're right there to help you navigate over 22,000 filing requirements across the country. So what does it take to manage BOI reporting compliance? Well, in theory, you could invest a bunch of time building systems and processes to securely gather and store all the required information. You could prepare the filing all on your own and muddle through the BOSS portal filing process. You could set notifications to track changes to the reported information and the filing requirement itself. You could budget a bunch of time and resources to complete updated and corrected reports every time something inevitably changes. You could build all these processes into your daily routine if you chose. Or you could lean on Harbor Compliance to just take care of it for you. So with that, that's my big punchline. It concludes our presentation for today. And now I'm going to open up the floor for questions. So let's double check and see what's come in so far. Okay, question here. Is this an annual reporting process? It is not technically an annual reporting process. It has an initial deadline by which all initial reports must be submitted. Those entities that were formed or registered this year had 90 days from the date they were initially registered to submit their initial report, and those that existed prior to this year have until the end of the year to submit them. Going forward, there is not a renewal deadline where updated information needs to be submitted. There is, however, instead a trigger for updated or corrected reports whenever underlying information either changes or if it was initially reported inaccurately and it needs to be updated with FinCEN. Both of those types of reports, updated and corrected, need to be submitted within 30 days of learning of the underlying change. It's a very good question. So it's not an annual reporting process. However, it is an ongoing reporting process. Okay. I'm getting a lot of questions in the large operating company exemption. I'll tell you what, just about everybody on this call has already responded to those questions, and we will follow up with a detailed explanation for individualized for the responses that you've provided so far. In general, you have to meet all three criteria in order to be exempt. So if you have more than 20 employees, more than 5 million in gross receipts or sales in last year's tax return, and an operating presence in the U.S., then you would qualify for that category of exemption. Okay. I'm getting questions about the format of the filings. If a company has 4 beneficial owners, is that 1 filing or 4 filings? So for each beneficial ownership information report, you're submitting information about the company itself, the legal entity, and the associated beneficial owners and company applicants, if that applies, right? So that is all gathered together and submitted in the very same report, and it all needs to be maintained. Question here, does a sole proprietor entity need to report? That's a good question. I've gotten it before. Legal entities, virtually all legal entities must report. And because sole proprietorships are generally unincorporated entities, they're not registered with the Secretary of State. They don't have limit of liability. They're not a separate legal entity. There is no report being submitted for those. There are some exclusions for certain types of trusts that are also not registered with the Secretary of State, and therefore there is no reporting requirement for those entities. Okay. I've got some questions about the service and whether or not it operates as a subscription, the Harbor Compliance offering. So the Harbor Compliance offering is a subscription service. You pay 1 flat fee. The retail rate is $199. You pay that annually, and it includes up to 4 filings per year, initial, updated, or corrected. It doesn't matter what type. So that is an ongoing subscription. There's no long-term commitments to it. So if you are one of these organizations who you think you might be exempt, but you're not 100% sure, and you want to go ahead and just do the filing anyway and then have us update it, you could order the service now for $199. There's no filing fee to submit it to FinCEN. And then once it's been submitted, if you later find out you get confirmation that you're exempt and you want to declare your exemption, you'd notify us of that via the portal. And then we could file the updated status report to tell FinCEN, hey, this entity is no longer required to file. And then you can cancel the service at that point if it's determined that no report is required. That being said, I say all of this to encourage folks to take the proactive path and avoid the worst case scenario, which would be the $591 per day penalties and potential jail time. Like that's scary stuff, not to be messed with. But the vast majority of entities, 97% of entities in the US, will likely need to report this. So I don't anticipate there's going to be tons and tons of clients of ours who take that path of initially filing and finding out, oh, I'm now exempt and I don't have to report it anymore. More often than not, these organizations will need to report on an ongoing basis and keep that data up to date. I've got a good one here. How are companies notified of the BOI reporting? I only heard about it from one of the states that we are licensed with. That's a great question. It is FinCEN's responsibility because they are the ones who are overseeing the regulation. They are managing the filing process. And so they are doing some things. If you follow them on LinkedIn, you can see their notices. If you follow attorneys and accountants on LinkedIn who are really into the Corporate Transparency Act, you'll pick up them sharing a lot of this information. But so far, there hasn't been a massive public push to notify folks of the need to report. And it's somewhat concerning, especially given the commentary we received just 2 weeks ago about their lack of confidence in their own system's ability to handle the millions of filings that are going to be submitted throughout the end of the year. I think they fully anticipated that there would be a big tidal wave in Q4 of this year, and they really didn't get out ahead of it to notify folks like, hey, you should file early because there's going to be a rush at the end. They're really waiting to the last minute to notify everybody of it. And so it remains to be seen if the system can keep up. So you're not alone if you haven't heard about this from anybody yet. That's why we're all here to learn more about it. Okay. Company applicant. There's a question here. Company applicant. Does this include third-party companies filing on behalf of the legal entity or only if they have ownership in the company? That's a great question. Company applicants need not have any ownership stake in the company. They just need to form the entity. And if there's a third-party company involved in doing the formation, the individual who directed that formation and the individual who actually did the filing would need to be reported. So you'd need the name of the individual who actually submitted at the third party provider. Because again, just like beneficial owners, you can't have a company act as a company applicant. It needs to be a private individual. Okay. All right, we're coming up on the end of our webinar presentation here. I really appreciate all the questions you guys have been asking. This is terrific. I'm not going to be able to get to nearly all of these. I have over 40 questions already. Feel free, log them in here now. I will get back to you via email with responses. We'll get to the bottom of these questions for you. And the recording will be sent after the presentation. So everything we've covered here, you'll have access to. It'll be at your fingertips. And if there are questions along the way, don't hesitate to reach out. Come to us directly. My contact information is on the screen. But overall, this has been a great presentation. Really appreciate the input and the engagement. Hope you have a great rest of your day and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.